And I just want to thank all our special guests for coming in to be a part of this. I'm going to turn it over to Brianna to um, facilitate, to moderate our discussion. And I want to just remind everybody that we have Kshama Sawant with us in Seattle. Kshama, who is leading the charge to dismantle duopoly. So more to come. Go ahead.
All right, I'm so glad to be here on this esteemed panel. I figured we should start. I'll pass the mic down. If we could briefly introduce ourselves. I'm Brianna Joy Gray. I host a show called Bad Faith Podcast. I was previously, thank you. You guys are great. This is my kind of room. And I feel weird as given my place in the left media ecosystem, as Kshama can attest to, how difficult it is to get ostensibly independent left media outlets to even cover third parties. And I do think that's a particular hurdle that I'm thinking of. And so I wondered if, as we go down and introduce ourselves, we could briefly say what we perceive to be, from our own experience, one of the hurdles the Greens are up against, and if you have any thoughts about what to do about that.
I'm Sherry Honkala. I was Jill Stein's running mate. I also ran for sheriff on a no evictions campaign. I also ran for state rep and learned a great deal about the Democratic Party and how they steal elections. And I'm not Donald Trump. So I'm a part of a national movement called the Poor People's Army. And I will just say something very significant about us is we travel in packs. We walk the walk. We don't just talk the talk.
Butch Ware. I was honored to run as the vice presidential candidate for the Green Party alongside Jill in 2024. And honored to run as the Green candidate for governor in California in 2026. I'll respond briefly to Bree's question. The lack of media exposure that you've already cited is a principal issue. I think that the biggest obstacle perhaps that we have to overcome is the lack of political infrastructure on the ground that will be required to actually build this into the electoral threat that we need it to be. I think that the Greens have had the best platform for Black liberation, but haven't been a Black People's Party. I think the Greens have had the best platform for, Chicano power and, immigration rights, but it has not been a Brown People's Party. It's had the best, most radical stance with respect to Palestinian liberation. And it became, a home for the Palestinian liberation movement, a political home for the Palestinian liberation movement after 2024. But I think that we have to have a clear-eyed and sober assessment of the fact that we have a massive lift in front of us if we are going to not just challenge the duopoly, but destroy capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy. And so the way that I would, just respond again briefly is that, in my view, this, which, as Jill pointed out, we are clearly poised and positioned as the only national political party that has the capacity to strike at the heart of American empire, and they know it. That's why they come after Jill. That's why they try to knock me off the ballot in California and all of those other things, that we have to become the party that realizes the people's aspirations for liberation, and that means we have to become the tool, Kwame Ture argued, he said, revolutionaries don't just mobilize around issues, revolutionaries organize against systems. And what I often add to what Kwame Ture said in my own campaign speeches is that when Jill invited me to run as the vice presidential candidate in this party, then that means that this is going to become a party that inherits the mantle of becoming that revolutionary party, because it is the role of a revolutionary party to channel the people's energy from mobilization around issues like Palestinian liberation, like ICE abolition, like the fight for Black life, and into an organization against the system that produce all of those oppressive outcomes. That's our job. Our job is to become the electoral political arm of a broader liberation movement.
What's popping? My friends, my family, is good to be here. I'm Nick Cruz, co-founder of Revolutionary Blackout, my brother and partner in arms, my man Rome over there. We founded Revolutionary Blackout. We was a post Bernie Sanders movement. There was a lot of people who made their name, especially in the media space, riding the wave of Bernie Sanders, the same way that many people are riding the wave of Zoran Mamdani, DSA, while ignoring Kshama, Sawant, Jill Stein. We formed RBN in order to create a think tank on what the left should do in a post-Bernie Sanders world when we've seen the infiltration strategy fail multiple times. And I believe that we are in a historic moment where we have to build something, not engage in entryism. Because I was radicalized during the Barack Obama administration. After falling for his lies about ending the wars, I was a teenager. I was in high school when I seen the atrocities of Abu Ghraib, when I saw the atrocities of the Iraq War. And it reminded me what I heard in history class when I had tears going down my face, seeing the crimes that they committed against my people. So I want to end this war machine, because if you think about it, what does it really mean to be an environmentalist? If you're an environmentalist without addressing the immense problem of the military industrial complex and what it affects on our planet, you're not an environmentalist, you're a gardener. The biggest obstacle that we have are the people who brainwash many like-minded people like us with tranquilizing drugs and false belief that they can take over a party that is responsible for mass death and atrocity around the world. My last point before I pass to Jill Stein, regarding the importance of opposing the military-industrial complex and why the DSA left is not the way to go. They are all, despite claiming they're environmentalists, they support the proxy war, the destabilizing proxy war against our Russian brothers and sisters, including the regime that was found responsible by a German court for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. And you guys notice not a single progressive Democrat, including your favorites.
I ain't got no favorites.
Yeah. They say nothing about it. And you guys realize that the Nord Stream pipeline bombing was the largest single environmental eco-terrorist activity of all time. 450,000 metric tons of methane were leaked into the atmosphere. So as I said before, you're not environmentalist unless you oppose the war machine. And every single progressive Democrat failed in that task.
And I'll say, as someone who started off like way back when in the 60s in the civil rights movement and the women's movement and the environmental movement, and we thought that movements, you know, were going to change the world, and they did change some things, but then we've done an awful lot of backsliding since then on really just about everything. And it was a very slow wake up for me that it's not enough to fight on the issues that unless you actually challenge power, you're spinning your wheels, and you can't challenge power based on one issue. You will never get to critical mass in order to, fight City Hall. And it was only after my hair had turned this color that, so most of you are like way ahead of me. It took this for me to like get that, oh, so that's what a political party should be. It is a coalition of people with a clear agenda to fix healthcare and housing and, the climate and jobs and war. But you have to do all of that. Those are all independent. They are all dependent. You will not fix one without fixing the others. As Martin Luther King said, the triple evils of militarism, racism, and extreme materialism, aka capitalism, that they are joined at the hip. This is the triple evil. You cannot fix one without fixing them all. Well, how do you fix them all? It really takes a coalition that's going to work together with specific strategies and and commitments over time, over space, over generations. This doesn't happen overnight, but the harder you work, the better. And it's an emergency. We really need to pick it up. Anyhow, for me, that was the revelation, realizing that you don't do this alone. You don't do it on one issue. So, that's why we need to dismantle duopoly. And we're going over to Kshama now. Let's give a big hand to Kshama and a big thank you for all she's doing to dismantle duopoly.
Hope you all can hear me. Thanks so much for including me in this conversation, Jill and everyone else. Really happy to see you all over Zoom. Apologies, I can't be there in person. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about, but just to answer Brianna's question, what is the main obstacle that we find in doing this work of independent politics? Obviously, and Brianna alluded to this, the corporate media blackout. That's a big obstacle, yes. But I think that's a more overtly visible obstacle that a lot of working people understand. But another very insidious and probably not very well understood obstacle is what I call gatekeepers or gatekeeperism, which is basically individuals and especially in leadership positions who seem like they should be on the side of the working class, but the actual role that they play is to give cover to the establishment. And part of this has been that there has been a big blackout on our campaign, our congressional campaign against genocidal Democrat Adam Smith, even from a big section of what we would call progressive podcasts or progressive papers like The Nation, like Jacobin, none of them even mentioning our campaign. Like if you were reading some of these newspapers on a regular basis, you would have no idea that our campaign exists. And the reason they're doing that is not only because our campaign, just to take our campaign's example for a moment, not that it's unique, obviously, Jill Stein and all of you who are here, who've been doing this work for decades, you face the same obstacles. But just to see what's happening in our campaign here this year in this primary election, that we have enormous momentum on the ground. We have raised $700,000 despite the almost total corporate media blackout. We have spoken to tens of thousands of people in the district. The campaign is very popular. Obviously, it's an absolutely uphill task because the Democratic and Republican parties have together moved some maneuvers, which I don't have time to get into here, but it's worth talking about in this discussion later. But because of all those reasons, it's already uphill. But the fact that there is a total blackout, almost total blackout, even among the what we would call progressive podcasts, has also been a big obstacle. And that is an obstacle I want to talk about more because that is not well understood. And that is part of what I call gatekeeperism. That also includes labor leaders, many of the labor leaders, not all of them, but many of the labor leaders who are subscribed to the Democratic Party, don't really fight against the bosses. All of this is relevant because the leadership of many of the big labor unions and labor federations have actually endorsed Adam Smith, even though he is voting for the genocide. He is an absolutely just horrendous warmonger. He has the blood on his hands of 1 million Iraqis and millions of other people. And yet the labor leaders have endorsed him. And so the progressive Democrats are also part of this because they give cover to the labor leaders give cover to the progressive Democrats. All of this gatekeeper apparatus is a huge obstacle to building any type of independent politics. And just to say, many of the progressive podcasts have said that they are not having us on because they don't see our campaign as viable, which you can see is completely absurd just on the facts of the campaign, but also on the fact that I have won 4 elections on the Seattle City Council as an independent socialist, and we have won massive victories like the nation's highest minimum wage. It's now $21.30 an hour in Seattle. We won the Amazon tax. We defeated Jeff Bezos to win that. And we have defeated corporate landlords, Trump supporting corporate landlords in winning renters' rights and also defeating their recall attempt against me. And so I don't accept that this is the actual reason that they are not featuring us. The actual reason they are not featuring us is because they're playing the role of gatekeepers, which is they don't want any actual challenge to the Democratic Party and Republican Party establishment. They want to be the sort of the left wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah. I really appreciate you saying all of that, Kshama. As you know, we've sort of been in the thick of having this conversation for the last week or so. If you haven't been following this, I know that everyone isn't as horrifically online as I am, but it literally took a week plus long bullying campaign of Ryan Grimm, my former boss at The Intercept of Job Site News, to get him to concede on his argument that Kshama's campaign wasn't relevant enough, or that she hadn't done some poll that demonstrated viabilities, new standards that he was erecting that had never been applied to any other candidate that he had interviewed, from Zohar Mamdani, who was polling at 1% when they were doing interviews with him, to Graham Plattner, and we all know how that ultimately ended. But this kind of controlled opposition approach, you're seeing not just in the context of a campaign like Kshama's, where there's a media blackout, but also I see it and anticipate it growing in the lead up to 2028, where I'm seeing videos of people like Hassan Piker and Mehdi Hassan talk about who the viable candidates are going to be for 2028, and what feels like preemptively narrowing the field to a list of acceptable candidates that of course exclude anybody from outside of the party. And very predictably, we know what's going to happen when the election year comes around. They're going to say, oh, well, we don't have time to vet anybody else. This is who we're stuck with. Even candidates they could vet and run within the Democratic Party, they're not even having that conversation. It's basically, can we get AOC across the finish line, and trying to get free buy-in for her. So I had the thought, would it be easier to push back against that if there were independent party candidates that were established more in advance, that we could be pushing now as part of the conversation that they're having? And I wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in on that.
Yeah, it's very important that Kshama brought this up, because you have to realize that the #1 goal of progressive Democrats right now is to prevent an anti-Zionist movement from starting outside the Democratic Party. The job of the DSA and their politicians is to keep the anti-Zionist movement and Palestinians in line. That's why they demand them to condemn the resistance. They demand that they condemn all the enemies of the United States. And if there's any true alternative to the Democratic Party, which is a Zionist party, you will see the quote unquote progressives come out in mass and smear them. And Jill Stein mentioned this earlier. When Jill Stein was running, who did they call to attack Jill Stein? AOC, who called Jill Stein predatory. Can you believe that? I'm gonna say this. The reason why I'm a proud multi-time Jill Stein voter, because Jill Stein is an anti-Zionist Jew who put her body on the line and was brutally arrested.
Jail time.
Now think about the audacity of this clown AOC, who took her grandpa, Joe Biden, Genocide Joe. Remember the pictures of her holding his hand, walking him in the park, being his babysitter, as she lies to the pro-Palestine movement and said that he's working tirelessly for a ceasefire. So think about how absurd this is, that person is accusing someone who was arrested fighting against the genocide. you're predatory if you're arrested fighting a genocide. But if you was to lie about the people who are victims of genocide and say you're fighting for them, that's not predatory. And they will do the same thing. They will do the same thing if we have Butch Ware in 2028, for example. They will find any reason. He will end the damn war machine, that's for damn sure. He will end the damn war machine. But they will always be there to be attack dogs of the establishment. They completely shown their hands last time. And that's why I personally take an adversarial position to them. And we got to let people know that people who you shown on your graph who wants a third party, we have to let them know that there are options and they can go further left. They can go further than what the sheepdogs are offering by just incrementalism and tranquilizing drugs. Anyone else?
The one and only Nick Cruz, everybody. I'm not gonna touch the first part of that question at this time. But I want to pick up on a piece of what Nick laid down. And I mentioned this in the Muslim panel a few hours ago, but I'll repeat it here. My colleague Dylan Rodriguez at UC Irvine famously said the Democrat Party is the most effective counterinsurgency organization ever to emerge in human history. I need you to hear those bars, right? The Democrat Party is the most effective counterinsurgency organization ever to emerge in human history. And when I give the exegesis of that in my campaign speeches, I say, they're where revolutions go to die. Yes. Their job is to keep any independent political challenge to capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy from ever emerging to their left. That is their job. And so they are, of course, running cover and carrying water. And Hassan Piker, you know, like, I'm the candy man, apparently, to these so-called leftist media, because they're afraid that if you say Butch Ware 3 times, I'm gonna come out and take next, because literally, despite the fact that we have like mutual personal friends in the Muslim community that put us in text threads, he's not allowed to interview me, right? You have to understand that they are under strict orders to at no time give any air to what we are building in a room like this one. So we need to have like a clear-eyed, sober assessment of that fact. And part of the solution is to realize that we are going to have to build our own independent and autonomous political channels. We had a maroon media panel at UC Santa Barbara in 2024 where we talked about what it means. What maroons, for those of you that don't know, are enslaved Africans that liberated themselves and founded their own independent autonomous communities. They created space outside of the system of capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy. They made their own rules, and we're going to have to do a whole hell of a lot of that. We're going to have to build living alternatives to this system. And I guess the last thing that I'll say is also from, you know, one of our, kind of a persistent line in the stump speeches in the California campaign was, you've heard me talk about Malcolm. Malcolm said, the liberal's a fox, it bares its teeth, you think it's smiling, you're on the menu. The conservative is a wolf. When it bares its teeth, it's into a vicious snarl that leaves the black man no illusion as to where he stands. He argued that the black community and broader political communities, marginalized communities, are caught between two predators that differ only in the way that they hunt. There's no difference between Democrats and Republicans. Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's first president, he said, of course, the United States is a single party state, but with typical American extravagance, they have two of them. W.E. said in 1956 that there is no lesser evil, there is only one party. So I said what Malcolm said, you know, here's one for me, and take this to your liberal friends when they are thinking about voting for Democrats with that lesser of two evil arguments. A sheep is going to live its entire life in fear of a wolf, only be consumed by the shepherd. The Democrats are going to be pointing over there at the big, scary Republican wolf. Do you follow me? They want to keep you close because they want you prepared for the slaughter themselves. So we need to be clear-eyed that there is no iteration of Democrat, DSA, left, so-called left or liberal media that is any kind of friend to any of us. Yeah.
Okay, so for us in the Poor People's Movement, our experience has been just as tragic. I can't even I said earlier today I was going to write an encyclopedia on the different kinds of trauma that we've experienced from the Democratic Party, because what we say is we're not from the left, we're not from the right, we're for the bottom, and we're coming for the top. You know, it's really difficult to turn on the TV and to perhaps hear about the tragedy that's happening in different parts of the world, to the different wars that are taking place, and then to open up my front door and see 2, 3 people laying there, unable to move, maybe even dead from fentanyl. I recently adopted a child. You can Google him. He's the first child that was diagnosed in this country with fentanyl fetal syndrome. And this, we know, is not by accident. They're making those that are on the bottom more and more. They don't give a damn who you are. They're making you disappear. And so for us, you know, I remember many of the conversations, was one of the founders of the Labor Party, worked round the clock with Tony Mazzocchi. People looked at us like we were crazy. What are you, a bunch of poor folks trying to work with organized labor when they basically treat poor folks like they're shit, like they don't matter, they don't have a voice? But we continue to work with organized labor. And then I found out some really important things along the way, that the party was trying to do something, but it became more just about an individual. You know, when Tony passed away, then that's when I decided to join the Green Party. But the thing that I saw in my run for office is that we were so excited because we had the best ground game that you could possibly imagine. We had something that the Democratic Party didn't have, which is we had troops on the ground. We didn't just have smoking mirrors. And we raised over $100,000 in 6 weeks. Now, the thing that I want to say is that 2 horrifying lessons that I've had to learn over the years, and those are going to be the longest chapters in my encyclopedia. One is sadly going to be about when I ran for state representative, and all those labor leaders that I worked with for a very, very long time said, Sherry, we got you. We're going to endorse you. I walked out the room. I even brought into the meeting a photograph of me with every single one of those labor leaders and how we brought the bulk of the actual folks to the demonstrations. And as I walked out, I got a phone call from one of those labor leaders in the room, who I can never say to this day who he was, saying, Sherry, they're not allowed to vote for you. They're not allowed to endorse you. As a matter of fact, the next day or 2 days later, they put out literature they issued a code blue. They put out literature throughout the entire neighborhood with a photograph of myself and Donald Trump, saying that if they voted for me in the neighborhood, they did a lit drop, guys. That's a lot of money. And with a slick photograph of me on AFL-CIO literature of me and Donald Trump. And lastly, I want to say, when Butch talked about earlier about when something really begins to become revolutionary in this country, they got to put you on the wrong road. They've got to put other leaders before you. And so at the height of, we were traveling all around this country, the poor people's movement was really growing, and then they announced that our former intern, Reverend Liz Theo Harris, was starting something new called the Poor People's Campaign. And they put me in a room. And Galen saw that they put me in a room. He tried to come over to the room in Baltimore and say, Sherry, what the hell are they doing to you in that room? They said, Sherry, if you don't go out there and publicly announce that you're going to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign, they are going to destroy you. And instead, to the Poor People's Campaign across the country, they passed out big time money to work on Bernie's campaign. And that's just the facts of it. And then this powerful, indigenous, grounded under the, on the total bottom movement of poor people of all colors across this country, then they began to make us invisible. Well, you know what? We now have our own center. We're building, and they can't take us down, and we're independent.
Kshama, let's get you in here as well. We haven't forgotten about you.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I wasn't worried that you had forgotten, but yeah, I think this is a very important question that it's a really important question of strategy that Brianna has posed, which is it important for independent candidates to run? I know it was framed specifically in relation to should they be early candidates in relation to the presidential election, but I wanted to interpret that question more generally and talk about why it is really crucial that if we are going to build independent movements, we absolutely need to build independent campaigns for elections, and that the idea of electoral versus movements, that's a very misleading dichotomy, because in reality, everything is movements. Without mobilizing and organizing a mass of the working class and posing a real threat to the profit machine of the bosses, nothing shifts anyway. So even when we talk about electoral, as far as from our standpoint, in Worker Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers, it is always the question of election campaigns is always posed in the framework of what is the biggest breakthrough possible that we could have to build working people's movements. And so in that sense, they both go together, but it's also, it's important to develop that point further and emphasize that we do need to run candidates actually. And the reason is that we have in order to wrest concessions from the billionaires and multimillionaires, and that is the only way that we can win any victories possible, let alone actually overthrow capitalism. It will take revolutionary movements. But it's no coincidence that that we as revolutionary socialists were the winners of the most far-reaching changes in terms of substantive victories like the nation's highest minimum wage. It's no coincidence that it was revolutionary socialists who won that, because it helps you understand the actual terrain under capitalism. And a basic idea that we need to learn as the working class is that nothing shifts unless you pose a credible threat to the billionaires and multimillionaires and their spokespeople who are closer to you. You don't really run into Jeff Bezos. You run into the people who are representing the interests of Jeff Bezos. And so posing a credible threat to them is very, very crucial. So part of it is building a movement that has a strategy that poses a credible threat. In other words, just to give you a concrete example, after I left office after a decade, yes, last year actually, and then the year before, the Democrats on the Seattle City Council tried to attack our minimum wage victory, and also they tried to carve out a path to bring an omnibus bill to destroy the renters' rights that we had won. And we had won a whole fleet of renters' bill of rights. And the way we defeated that without even an elected office was by building a movement that called out the Democrats by name, and then we shamed them. And so naming and shaming is part of the threat that we have to use against these spokespeople, political representatives of the bosses, because they don't budge. They represent the bosses. There's a class divide. So they don't budge until they feel real heat for their own political careers. And in fact, we have actually a long track record of forcing Democrats out of office because they just get fed up. They are so exposed because of their betrayals, but by the kind of the movements we build, that they end up leaving office. So, for example, the Democrat who brought forward that bill to dismantle our renters' rights last year, Kathy Moore, on the Seattle City Council, not only did we force her to back off on that bill, she also ended up resigning that same day because she was so exposed. And that has to go alongside actually running candidates against the Democratic Party and obviously the Republican Party. Without running candidates, what happens is that at the end of the day, the Democrats don't face, and obviously this is true of Republicans too, but they don't face, the parties of the bosses are actually, they're not inanimate objects. They're made up of individual politicians. And each individual politician is a careerist, and they're evaluating the interests of their career on the basis of who's really on their back, whose threat do they face. And the status quo of the threat they face is from the bosses. And they are, it's convenient for the politicians to be aligned with the interests of the bosses, ideologically aligned, because for the most part, that is the pressure on them. So if you don't deliver for the Zionist lobby, if you don't deliver for big business, then you will face a threat in your election. So, we have to change the balance of power by posing a counter threat to their actual political career. So it has to be about a real threat to their actual political careers. And that can only be done by the combination of the kind of movement I described, and also independent candidates running against them posing a real threat. Like Adam Smith is running scared right now, and I don't want people to be complacent by that. As I said, it is an uphill climb for us to get into the November election because only the top 2 vote getters go into the November election. But we have a fighting shot because of the kind of campaign we are running. And so I think running a candidate against Adam Smith is super crucial, just like running a candidate against Donald Trump and Kamala Harris was super crucial, as Jill did. And it really, we cannot have enough words for the sacrifices that Jill has made in doing this. And just as Nick said, the way she has been maligned, especially by AOC, calling her predatory, I mean, that is just absolutely despicable that she did that. AOC did that. But I just wanted to use one last example, actually a couple of last examples, why running independent candidates, and not just in name, but like campaigns that are fighting hard, campaigns that are rooted in movements, campaigns that are a credible threat against the Democratic Party is so important. Sherry mentioned the Labor Party. I mean, that was a valiant effort. I mean, it was before my time. I should be clear about that. But our analysis of that is that one of the reasons that effort didn't go far is because there was a real gatekeeperism there as well. And some of the labor leaders did not want to actually run candidates. See, that doesn't work. You can't launch a party in name as an opposition to the Democratic and Republican parties and not actually pose concrete threat to them. It doesn't work. You have to pose concrete threat. And then the other example I wanted to provide is what happened with CalCare, which is the universal healthcare Medicare for all bill that the nurses union leadership has put forward in California, in a state that has a Democratic governor and a supermajority or a near supermajority of the Democratic Party in both houses of the state legislature. CalCare was crushed by the Democrats 4 times in the last 10 years. I mean, if this is not a lesson, I don't know what is. But the reason this is relevant to Brianna's question is that running independent working class candidates against Democrats who have sold out is integral to any serious working class fight back, is shown in what's happened in California. How is it that we have allowed them to sell out CalCare 4 times? And this is the fault of the nurses union leadership as well, because they keep using a strategy that has completely failed. But I just wanted to share a quote. A California newspaper noted after the 2022 debacle, I mean, two other debacles happened since then, but after that debacle, which was, I think, the second debacle, they said that even the threat of losing labor endorsements in the upcoming election cycle was not enough to persuade the Assembly's Democratic supermajority to advance the bill. And that is a quote from the newspaper. But my analysis is that this is because of the simple reason that the Democrats don't feel any threat unless their careers are on the line. And their careers are going to be on the line only if there are credible, independent candidates who are running them that make them feel scared for their own jobs.
And I'm going to piggyback on what Kshama just said by one of the best ways I think we can make them really scared right now is for us to be supporting Kshama across party lines. That is really scary. So I want to encourage, whether you're a green or a socialist or an independent or whatever, to go to Kshama's website and see how you can help out, either donating or phone banking and so on. So, because that, I think, that's like the death knell to the Democrats. If they see not only that we're out here and we're running really great candidates and we have terrific exemplary campaigns, but that we're beginning to work together across independent political boundaries, and then we're really unstoppable. In the same way that Kshama supported our presidential run and was really out there advocating for us, it's really great for us to reciprocate that right now. And she has a real fighting chance. I think that what just happened on Breaking Points is pretty amazing. I mean, it's just incredible that they refused to cover, a 4-term or whatever it was, city councilor who originated the whole fight for 15 and for living wages for workers all across the country, and rent control and taxing corporations and supporting affordable housing, all these amazing breakthroughs that were made under Kshama's sole leadership on the Democratic City Council that opposed her. She did really incredible stuff. We need to be supporting that and lifting that up. If we are doing that together in Kshama's race, we can continue doing that. That is the answer in the long run, I think, is for us to be building as broad a coalition as we can. And many of us in the Greens, Gloria Matira out there and myself and a few others, we've been working over the years to try to build a kind of an alliance among independent lefty political parties to try to work together. We actually had a really fantastic conference here in Chicago in 2012, was it? It was 2016. And it was Bernie Sanders' emergence at that, I think it was 2014, right? It was 2014 when Bernie was just starting to talk about it, and this independent collaboration was really getting off the ground, and then suddenly Bernie sheepdogged a whole lot of it, and all the air went out of that balloon, and it never quite got back together again. But that's really where we need to be. That would be the ultimate threat to them. But what Breaking Points did, they said that Kshama was not credible, was not unique, was not a winner. There wasn't, Ryan Grimm was just like confabulating. It was kind of pathetic to hear as he was trying to reach for reasons to defend why he wouldn't bring Kshama on. And then what he went and did the next week was so outrageous. While they refused to bring Kshama on, they brought on Adam Smith. They brought him on. Yes, and gave him unlimited airtime while they wouldn't, sort of the architect of the, support for Israel, and they would not support the opponent to the genocide. It's just unthinkable. And it underscores why these paragons of independent media, like the ones that are up here, are just Brianna and Nick. We owe you so much. Rome, one other thing, what's that? Yeah, it's August 4th. We got 10 days. So get on Kshama's campaign right now if you possibly can. Then I also want to just briefly, again, following up on what Kshama was saying about we need a big movement and it needs to be organized, and that movements blend into campaigns, blend into movements, which makes the point that we want to get together around campaigns, but we also want to get together between campaigns with a kind of informal coalition at this point. I think it's not about, once you start creating one party, everybody wants it to be their party. So I think you just defer that discussion about what you're going to call it. Let's just like collaborate. Let's collaborate. Morena in Mexico in some ways was, you know, they're not a perfect party, but they're doing some pretty amazing things. And they started from a collaboration of social movements that worked together for about 5 years, and then they decided to start running candidates. So that's a powerful model. But in the, you know, in the process of working together, another thing we can do is lift up congressional candidates or candidates for state office and state legislature. There's so many ways that we can collaborate. I want to throw out one other idea, which is that you know, the issue of genocide is huge and is really a point, it's a breakaway point for so many people from the Democratic Party. And the Democrats are really working overtime to try to reclaim that issue. There's a possible development coming up. I mean, everybody's at their wits' end right now, what to do about the genocide and what to do about Iran and how incredibly stuck and explosive the whole situation is. Were people involved at all with Uniting for Peace when that was going on? I think a lot of people were. It's a strategy whereby the General Assembly, not the Security Council, but the General Assembly can override the Security Council. The General Assembly has already voted 90% that they wanted to hold Israel accountable to the ICJ, the Independent Court of Justice rulings to end the genocide, the occupation, and ethnic cleansing. And the UN has already voted in favor of that. So there was a big move to try to push that along with a protection force for Gaza, which is, that's a hard sell right now because there's a lot of bullets flying and rockets. So it wouldn't be so easy to have a protection force. But on the other hand, how was South Africa's apartheid government brought down? By a massive total sanctions boycott and diplomatic isolation. That's what needs to happen right now. There's absolutely no reason not to do that. And for all of our candidates, this is like the litmus test. The Democrats are not going to support that. Even DSA is not going to support that. It would be just shocking if they did. But for us to be redefining what it means to be anti-genocide, to redefine what that means supporting total boycott, sanctions, diplomatic isolation, military and economic against Israel right now. For us to be pushing that as an actual thing that we can do, which would, by the way, override the scam perpetrated by the Trump administration and then sanctified by the Security Council, which was to enact this Trump Board of Peace. I hate to even say those words. It's so obnoxious, but the scam has worn off and people are ready to fight back. So this might be the time to reenact this 2.0 for the Uniting for Peace. And I want to give a shout out here for Sam Husseini, who is maybe running for Congress on this issue. And it was talking with Sam yesterday that really began to set off the fireworks in my own head about why this is the time to resurrect that. That was a really powerful movement, and I think it will be even more powerful now that people see there is no alternative to doing that. That's the only way we avoid World War III and nuclear war, is to really double down on that, and this is the time to do it. So that is another, Brianna had asked the question, what can we actually do to break up duopoly? So one thing I think we can actually do is to harness an actual strategy on the ground that draws the line between those who actually oppose genocide and those who don't. And the duopoly is on that side. They do not oppose genocide, and we do. And this is an issue that all of our candidates could get behind as well and really begin to cut the difference. Thank you.
Can I say something real quick?
If genocide isn't your red line, now I'm gonna just vote for the good genocidal Democrats. So she played a quote that was very influential in my thinking with MLK calling out the white moderates. You guys realize that Ryan Grimm is that white moderate that he's talking about, right? A lot of people misquote it. People say Joe Biden, he's not a white moderate, he's a genocidal far-right fascist. The people who are the white moderates are the one who claim to represent the ideas that we are expressing right now, but then they will tell you to vote for Jim Crow genocidal Joe, and they will tell you that now is not the time. We witness our Palestinian brothers and sisters being slaughtered. I've seen videos that will forever scar my soul of children being burned alive. But then the gatekeeper class, they are here to tell you, just like Hassan Piker, now is not the time. Now is not the time. We gotta, they will say nonsense. Exactly. They say nonsense. Like, now is not the time. We have to focus on shifting the Overton window. Have you guys heard that one? I want to ban that term. I hate the term Overton window. That was the worst term ever invented because it gives people a reason to be inactive. It gives them an excuse to not call for revolutionary change. We don't need to shift the Overton window. The people are already with us. We just got to organize them.
Did anybody catch, speaking of Ryan Grimm, there was a great back and forth between Jeremy Scahill and Ro Khanna where he basically forced Ro Khanna to admit that he only supported violence when it was Israelis killing Palestinians, but any kind of resistance, violent resistance, which is of course legal under international law, he did not support. People praised rightly Scahill for him in that exchange, but not everyone saw the follow-up where after Ro Khanna got off the stream and it was just Ryan and Jeremy and I think Emily Jashinsky, they were talking about the interview and Ryan goes, well, I think that maybe it's the case that Ro actually agrees with us. He just thought for political reasons he couldn't say it out loud. And then Jeremy, to his credit, goes, you know what, Ryan, it's not our job to fluff up the candidates. But that's the kind of thing that's been going on with left independent media that has been very frustrating to watch as someone who was colleagues with Ryan Grimm and who's been watching some version of this happening in slow motion for a long time. And people get very angry when I bring up Force That Vote. But part of the reason why I do is because it was one of the most obvious first times that Ryan Grimm was sort of playing this role as making excuses for elected officials as to why they were not willing to take an adversarial approach to the Democratic establishment, even though they purported to be elected into Congress and to run as Democrats to take on that adversarial approach. So I do think in some ways, what it feels like from my perspective in independent media is that there's a real constriction happening where as we get closer and closer to exposing these contradictions with the people that are supposed to be on our side, it actually becomes more difficult, not easier, right? It feels harder. And so when I'm asking these questions about how we plan to get around it, it's because in 2016, I would have said something like, oh, we just need to rely on independent media. And isn't it so great that this newcomer called AOC can go and talk to Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept and get this big boost from it. And she can go on the Jimmy Dore show and then she gets a national profile. That world kind of doesn't exist anymore because we've seen that the biggest channels, I mean, I'm very happy, Kshama, that you're going to be going on Breaking Points on Monday after like a week. Oh, you guys didn't know? Yeah. So it took a literal bullying campaign. But she's going on Monday, and I'm not sure if you're talking to Ryan and Crystal or just Crystal. Crystal tweeted it out, so it seemed to be that it was Crystal that was willing to interview you, and that Ryan maybe is still holding his ground there. Yeah. Well, but that world where you could say, oh, I'm going to go on TYT and I'm going to go on the Majority Report, and these channels have huge platforms, at least with respect to like media. And a lot of the Bernie excitement and fervor and energy came from those kinds of limited, but ultimately the biggest we've got sources. That doesn't exist anymore. So I was really heartened when you guys did that breakfast show club appearance, for instance, and got all this traction. But there, absolutely. And when you did like higher learning and shows like that, but I do have this question, are they gonna let us do that the next time around? Because they are evolving and morphing new ways to obstruct us faster than it seems like we are. So here's my question after all that rambling, I apologize. So I know that there are, you know, a lot of people want to take the wrong lessons from Zohran Mamdani, and there's this real fear that, again, he's another method to suck up this resistance energy. But it is also true, it seems, that he was able to have this breakthrough, even though the establishment was aligned against him, the Cuomo campaign, all of the elected New York City Democrats, and that he sort of came out of nowhere and even defeated Brad Lander and these other people that he ended up being in coalition with because it was a ranked choice election. If you were to ask me why this happened, I would say it's a combination of campaign finance laws in New York that equalize the playing field. It's the ranked choice of it all. But it's also the fact that Cuomo presented a uniquely bad enemy that everyone was against and were willing to co-endorse each other over and validate each other in that way. But also that combined with there being the Stop Cuomo campaign was the message before Zohran Mamdani was the candidate. And when I reflect on Kshama's successes in Washington State, I also think $15 minimum wage is the message before Kshama is the candidate. Even Bernie Sanders, it's Medicare for all was the message before Bernie is really the candidate. And I do wonder what you think going forward. Is it incumbent on Greens and Green candidates to have narrower versions of these messages? Zohran Mamdani and also the buses, the free buses, really narrowing down campaign promises so that to the extent that people have thoughts and feelings about the Green Party and stigmas about the Greens, that's almost secondary to what it is that they're fighting for. Ancillary to that, I understand that there's going to be an impulse to say Gaza, but I also do want to flag that when we're talking about the morphing and evolving, the Dems are morphing and evolving very quickly on ways to pretend that they support that issue when they do not. And you can see it even in Kshama's race with Adam Smith, who purported, again, to be against this section 219 of the NDAA that is merging the Israeli military with the American military. He says, I would vote against, I'm going to vote to strip it out of the NDAA. But when pressed by Crystal on the show, he says, well, if that effort fails, I'm still going to vote for the NDAA, right? So there's these very slippery ways to get around that. There's slippery ways to get around the Iron Dome funding because now they're just funding Israel in other ways. So I am not personally very confident that Gaza, which emerged as a red line for people who previously didn't apparently have one, is going to remain one going into the 2028 cycle and beyond. So that's a lot, but have you reckoned with how you're going to confront some of that stuff?
Great question. I would start with saying that my name is Sherry, and my younger son said that that's a verb. And the reason I say that is because I think that as Greens, the thing that can differentiate us from the other party that does, the sheepdogs, the other folks that don't do anything, don't represent anything, is that we actually do the stuff that has to be done. Earlier today, we had this workshop on mutual aid, right? One of the first things I did with Jill is we got arrested in a bank and went to jail. I think that there's, and we can become inseparably connected with the masses of people, and we can be in our neighborhoods, and we can know who's on our block, and we can represent issues like water. And that's the way that we're going to differentiate ourselves, is that we become the verbs. And I just also want to say the other thing that gets scarier, I think, that you raised is that you know, it's easy to just go out. It's not easy. I was going to say it's easy to go out here and just run as a green. Never. It's not easy. But it's easy to go out here and not put a face on. It's easier to not put a face on the enemy. And you know, when you talk about issues like slavery, could you imagine having a movement against slavery where you identify the slave masters? And right now in this country, with fascism, with people that are killing people all over the world, we have a responsibility. I don't give a damn if it's like we make our wall of shame. We start putting up wanted posters in the hood. You know, we had this huge fight and won it, you know, in Philadelphia there's only 2 like Chinatowns in the entire country. And that's because that's one of the strategies that people used is they made wanted posters and they put the owner that wanted to, you know, gentrify and take away Chinatown. And that's what we need to do. We got to get away from the easy stuff. We got to get in the ring and we got to show people how to fight and we got to put a face on it.
Come on, Sherry. I'm going to try to be brief. I'm not making any promises, but so the day, right? I usually get 75 minutes with undergraduates. So the day that the Secretary of State struck me from the ballot in the state of California, we were polling 5 points behind the leading Democrat candidates and had higher polling numbers than any third-party candidate in a California statewide election since 1946. Okay. Now, why do I mention that? For the same reason that they attacked Jill, and the same reason they attacked Kshama and try to free Kshama out. And of course, thank you, Kshama, for your endorsement of our campaign despite the obstacles. And you know I've endorsed your campaign, and I'm a big Kshama Sawant fan. The reason why I'm raising it is in direct response to your question, Bree. So in my real life, before all of this happened to me, I teach African history and revolutionary history, and I lived in West Africa. And Gordon Young, who's running for, in state senate in Minnesota, we share a language, a spoken language. She grew up with it, Wolof language. I learned it to speak it fluently during my field research in West Africa. And there's a saying in Wolof: the child of Adam does not release that which their hand is holding until they are reaching for something better. Do you hear me? The negative attacks on what the system is not providing actually do not move people. And too many so-called revolutionaries are so focused on what they're trying to tear down that they pay no attention to articulating that which they're trying to construct. And I think the reason why our campaign was so dangerous was precisely because we were laser focused, in contradistinction, by the way, to some other ideologically driven leftist parties, because my reading of Walter Rodney's brilliant, and I mean, just to be clear, I founded a Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist reading group when I was 19. We read Amilcar Cabral, Walter Rodney, Frantz Fanon, Assata Shakur, right? So I reread Walter Rodney's History of the Russian Revolution, which he never published. It was published posthumously from his lecture notes. And one of the things that I understood from this, which was critical, is that there were only 240,000 Bolsheviks in the entire surface area of Russia in 1917 when they effectively carried out an election, a revolution. Tiny number. Right, we approached those numbers in our own coalitions here. They did not persuade anyone. They didn't convert people to socialism or communism or anti-capitalism. They provided the material response that met the people's needs in a moment when capitalism and imperialism was in crisis. So our campaign was not about who we were tearing down or their inadequacies. Those are obvious and known to the people. Those numbers that Jill showed us make it clear that the people know that those two genocidal, corporate, white supremacist parties are trash. And there ain't a nickel's worth of difference twixt the two of them. So what did we do? We ran on universal single payer healthcare. We ran on social housing. I said, I'm gonna tax the shit out of Blackstone and BlackRock, right? And I'm gonna make them pay such a high vacancy tax that they are gonna sell those properties back to the state, and that becomes the basis for our social housing. It was healthcare, housing, human rights. I will prosecute any police departments that are found running cover or carrying water for ICE. And as governor, I would have never complied with any unconstitutional federal order, which means that the feds are going to have to go through every lawyer and law enforcement officer in the state before they so much as touch a hair on the head of anybody in my state. Well, anybody running for office can make that pledge because that's a pledge of protection that the people know that they need. It's not about what you're tearing down. It's about what you're offering. It is about what you are trying to build. And I think that we need to be laser focused in the messaging, because for me, yeah, Zoran gets propped up by that D next to his name. He still benefits from that blood money. Let's be real. And he put on a blood-soaked jersey when he put on a team blue jersey, did he not? So we're not going to get those discounts, but we do have to be laser focused on meeting people's material needs. We do not have to persuade them to see the world the way that we do. We have to persuade them that we can deliver on the things that they already know that they need: healthcare, housing, divestment from genocide, investment in education, infrastructure, protection from a police state. And the people are ready. We just have to be able to articulate the message with integrity and intelligence and imagination, and like move forward and farm in the field that Jill and Ralph have cleared for us.
Very well said. Very well said. I live in Missouri, despite many people considering me being extremely far left, and I reach people from all over the political spectrum. Like, do you guys know how many people who was formerly liberal, MAGA people, like, I never knew that I would relate to a radical socialist so much.
Right. Yep.
The reason why is the answer to the question. We appeal to people's material needs and reality. Is this on?
I think, yeah, that's it.
We good?
Yeah.
We good? All right, cool. Because we covered how the top 1% owns more than 90% of the. Do you guys think they're satisfied with that?
Nope.
do you think they're gonna be like, oh, we have enough, guys? No. Class war never ends. And they will continue to push, and they will never concede until we organize and as people fall off. Because every time these people in the duopoly inevitably disappoint the working class, you will see people fall off the pendulum.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember when it seems like after Barack Obama won in 2008, I remember being a young, dumb teenager, and I was like, man, Republicans are never gonna win again. Remember, people thought that we was gonna have a Democrat like Reagan like era where Democrats dominate for 15, 20 years. Then what happened? Barack Obama inevitably disappointed the working class and led to one of the most devastating transfer of wealth that we have seen in this country's history, with how you handled the financial crisis. That led people from falling off the pendulum. So as third-party movements, we have to brainstorm, how do we take people who are falling off that pendulum and redirect them into revolutionary energy? This is why what the DSA does is extremely important for the duopoly.
Yep.
Because in this moment, think about how much anger that people had against the Democratic Party after they funded and supported genocide. You had vast amount of people who exited, who said they will be done with genocide. That's why they need those tranquilizer drugs. They need people who bring them back in the party. But it's upon us to make sure they don't fall back on that wagon and appeal to their material interests, because things will always, the capitalist class will always continue to push. Let me ask you guys something. What is a boom bust cycle?
That is when the economy,
there's a lot of speculative bubbles, and it just builds up and collapses and builds up and collapses.
So we acknowledge, and even the professionals acknowledge, that capitalism is such a unstable system that they created a term. They created a term for when they engage in their next wealth transfer. Because did Elon Musk lose wealth during the COVID financial crisis?
Billionaires doubled their wealth. They doubled their wealth.
And that is by design. That is by design. They take advantage of these boom bust cycles in order to increase their wealth. Good luck reforming that. So there's going to be more. There's going to be another boom. There's going to be another boom bust cycle in another 4 or 5 years. So we got to be there for the working class.
And I want to add to this. I guess, if you look at what happened in the UK, the Green Party has skyrocketed. They are the fastest growing party. By some polls, they're in the number 2 slot. They have bypassed Labor and Conservative, the previous major parties. They didn't really change their message. Some years ago, they kind of adopted our agenda. They became much more radical and like the left Greens of the US. So it's not, in my experience, it's not like you can buy your way in by having a special crafted message. You can't have an unfocused or a message that doesn't really connect with people's material needs, healthcare and housing and jobs and water and air, and the military budget and the danger of ICE and the cops. You got to speak to what people are struggling with, but they're still going to ignore you, even when you have a really good, well-crafted message. But there's some point that people get to where they just can't take it anymore. And that's what happened in the UK. They crossed that threshold, and the Greens were there as the people-powered alternative that people could focus on, grab hold of, and make it their political home. It's my sense that we are on that trajectory. We've been on it for quite some time, but the duopoly and the oligarchy and corporations are much more dug in here. They have a much more vicious kind of system. They really have a stranglehold on it. It's harder to break, but people are really suffering here. And what's going to happen now? It's hard to see how we're going to get out of this mess that we're in. We have only begun to experience it. But the price of oil is probably going up to $200 or $300 a barrel. It's going to be absolutely insane. And we are going to have, it's highly likely now, and the respected economists that I listen to are all saying it's almost inevitable that we are going into the most severe depression, worse than the crash of the 1929, that we are going into a really, just the shit is going to hit the fan like never before. And people are going to look for somewhere else to go politically. And in my view, our job is to be here and to be heard and be as loud and long as we possibly can, so that when the system cracks, and it is cracking, but when the wall falls down, and it's going to, we are here as really the only politics of integrity that people can turn to that's actually meeting their needs. And the one other thing that goes with that, in watching Green candidates over the decades, where people have succeeded, it's where they have built a ground game. And it's races that are of a size that you can build a ground game. And I'm thinking, like, in particular, Kenneth Mejia, who was running for Congress in LA, and he began to build just an army of door knockers and phone bankers that gave him a lot of energy. And then when he finally began to run then for comptroller of LA, he had a really great message. It wasn't sophisticated. It was just that, you know, I'm going to be your comptroller and I'm going to be holding the city council and the budget accountable for you. And he started, you know, publishing all kinds of numbers that were never made available to people and advertising on billboards. And he just skyrocketed up. It was very simple, but he began with a ground game. And it's my sense that while we need to be fighting at the national level so that there is an alternative for, you know, for peace, for ending genocide, for Medicare for all. We need to be part of that discussion, but we also really need to be running local, state, and congressional candidates. And that's where we really begin to build the tools that we need. And I think, you know, the answer is not so much in finding things to please the corporate media or the corporate whatever. We're not going to get legitimacy from them, and we don't want it. What we really need to do is just speak to our base and build our tools for reaching out. And I do want to mention, in terms of building those resources, we are having a fundraiser tomorrow night with Roger Waters coming in by Zoom and Brianna interviewing Roger and Lee Camp delivering political therapy by Zoom, zooming in from Sweden. So it's going to be really amazing. There's also a limited number of tickets for the meal. The event is free for everyone who's here. You just show up. But there is a meal that we need to sell tickets for, and you can get that. I'm told there will be someone on your way out from the door here if you want to be a part of those festivities. And by the way, afterwards, we then have the Saturday night uprising party with urban line dancing and the rapper Butch Ware, I hear, is going to be showing up for this. So join us for the fundraiser, and let's build those resources so we can really do what needs to be done to keep fighting this battle, because the walls are falling down and we will be the only ones left standing when they do. Thank you.
So we have to start wrapping up, but I think we can maybe take a few questions from the audience, but let's do the thing where we ask a bunch of questions at once and then we'll answer them as a group. I just saw a hand in the press shirt back there. We'll come to you, and I see, okay. Well, we'll see what happens after this. Okay.
Good evening. Is it on? Yeah, it's on. Good evening, everybody. Two things. Butch, first of all, what you said, I'm tired of hearing the word duopoly. It's a uniparty, folks. That's what we're dealing with. It's a uniparty. Second, real quick, our friend whose name is 3 letters, you know, in New York. Yeah, well, she's never looked across the river because we run candidates in New Jersey every friggin' year, okay? So tell her to wake up and look on the other side of the river. Thank you very much.
Before I ask my question, I wanted to say thank you guys so much for what you guys are doing for the not just the Green Party, but for Greens everywhere in the US, including those who couldn't make it, and for the US. My question to you guys is as followed. What are your guys' recommendations for those who want to strategize elections and even ballot issues? Should we go with that in local elections such as school board, fire chief, town city council, etc.?
Thank you so much to the panel. I just wanted to ask too, you know, off of the question that Brianna asked a while ago about specific issues. One interesting thing as a New Yorker with Mamdani's campaign was that he took issues where he had a personal track record to talk about. And he also took issues that were indicative of his broader philosophy. So when we talk about like people, planet, peace, he was talking about being, a democratic socialist or whatever. But he was trying to take those issues where if you started to have a conversation about those issues, you had an idea of the kind of ideology he was pushing. And I wonder, are there, any good examples you guys have of, very specific issues in our communities that Green candidates have been able to, very successfully highlight and then start to build a big movement around that can start to shift people into a green way of thinking and into kind of our own, ideology being so different from that of the duopoly. Thank you so much.
Can we come down to these two in the center and then up front, and then I think we'll call it there. They both had their, yeah.
Hi, I'm a newer baby Illinois Green, and my friend Brian here is a Missouri Green. And we were talking about how we've both been noticing that while we can talk as much and vent to our inner circle, we are noticing that movements like Mamdani, however we may think about him, he did do a good job of getting on the ground, listening to the people, especially those MAGA voters who recognized that Trump had abandoned them, and asked them, met them where they were, what was concerning to them, what they needed. And we were thinking, what do Greens think about actually going to different corners of the state, trying to get even just a bus, a van of a few people and going around different areas, making those connections, forming the communities outside of our close circles? Because I think personally, it's easy to stay comfortable venting to your inner bubble, but we do need to meet people where they're at. And as Nick was saying, you can find yourself connecting with people like MAGA, like libertarians, like DSA, PSL, whoever, when we talk about issues like water, the data centers basically poisoning and heating up our air and all those kinds of things. So I just would like to ask that to the whole room and to you all as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Skip this one on real quick and.
Okay, I'm Taylor Frazier McCollum, and I'm from Maryland. I'm fighting a hyperscale data center there. And a lot of times when I'm online or, talking to people about being green, their thing is like, oh, we don't see you in the media. And you guys touched a lot on that. So I guess my question is just like, what can we do to counter that? Like, how do we canvas? How do we get to the streets? How do we bring our faces to people when it's not an election cycle? Like, so that they know that we're here and that we're supportive and we want these things for our community. So that's just what I was curious about.
Okay, thank you. And let's get this one last one. I've been writing them down, so don't worry. Right up front, I think. Right up front.
One of the things that I'd like to mention is, what is it that the Green Party can do to not only just help, educate and really get others, because I know I've talked to other disabled people that are not part of the Green Party locally as well, but yet at the same time, there's a lot of people who are very afraid that if they don't vote blue or they don't vote red, that they won't get heard. But yet at the same time, there are a lot of people who are really afraid of making the wrong choice. But yet, especially for people who have run for president before that are part of the Green Party, what is it specifically you could do to one thing is disabled people will end up like, what can you do to tell people that you really are going to like abolish things like sub minimum wage for disabled people? Those things are overlooked. Those things are overlooked when it comes to political, things like people who are disabled are punished whenever they want to work. They lose their SSI, they lose their food stamps, they lose their housing, they lose things that their medical, their Medicare, their Medicaid, all of these other things they lose. You're not taught to save money because you're punished for that, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So a couple of those I'm going to combine because they were along similar themes. So we basically had Mamdani ran on issues that were connected to his ideology. Are there examples that the Greens could have? Similarly, can Greens go around the country and poll folks the way that Mamdani did with Man on the Street interviews to isolate some of those issues? I think that's one question. Do you want to go for that first? And everyone, I don't think should answer all of these, but if you have a strong reaction to that. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Nick. Oh, sorry.
Um, I'm going to be uncharacteristically brief in the response to the two questions that emerged from the back of the room, because I also heard them as one question. Is Mike Feinstein around? So Mike's done great work accumulating the statistics of how Greens have performed in election cycles, and you can we've published these, circulated these in various places, but over the last 5 years, Greens have won 57% of the elections in which we have stood a candidate for office. Do you understand what I just said? And Greens have won 57% of the elections in which we have stood a candidate for office. We beat Team Blue and Team Red together when it's for city council and lower offices.
Yes.
So you have to get the idea out of your head that we're not winning. And that number was 78% over the last 3 years in the state of California. And that is precisely what we experienced on the ground. We are already winning on policy, on platform, and it's precisely because we in our campaign centered disability justice. My son is autistic. I have to center disability justice. I need a world where that boy's safe. Right? So, so we are winning on policy. We are winning on platform. We are winning on candidate quality each and every time we are going out and meeting the people where they're at. In a broader statewide election, they can turn a fire hose of money, right, and then make it difficult for us to win. But I want to be clear, the day that they knocked me off the ballot, Tom Steyer had spent $134 million to that day, and that had bought him a 5-point lead on me in the polls. Right? We are winning. So understand that work is being done. It just needs to be amplified. It needs to be reinforced. And the last thing I want to say, I want to shout out Juliana. I want to shout out all of and there's a bunch of people that made the trip out here from California. Elsa is also a campaign volunteer. Is that was our game plan. And I think that's why they were so afraid. Yeah. Because we built a ground game from San Diego to Humboldt County, Inland Empire. We tried to, as much as possible, have that kind of coherent messaging where we were leading with our values first. Yeah, please.
Can I ask you though, did you, I think it resonates with me, the idea that I want to see evidence that this is the issue that people are talking about. Do you know what I mean? Because I do feel like there's a little bit of exhaustion. Look, I work for Bernie, but if they're Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, rah, 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 it doesn't break through. And I think the question is it possible to break through a la Zoran, despite the fact that he was also outspent and if there's a message that is specific enough and novel enough feeling. Even when you said fentanyl, by the way, I was like, oh yeah, I remember pitching in The Intercept in 2018, whoever wins the drug crisis is going to win this election. And Trump did do a better job talking about fentanyl than the Democrats.
Yeah. So it's an incredibly important question to answer. So the first part of the answer is that we did this. Jill and I did this in 2024 because we responded to the critical need of the Muslim community, which was to respond to the genocide. We got 53% of Muslim Americans to vote green. And so what our response is with the state of California is it was not the same issue with each community. The appeal to Latino community, ICE abolition was leading the messaging. When we were targeting white working class communities, then healthcare was often the lead. In inner city urban communities, housing was often the lead. I think that we need a flexible, nuanced approach, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to just pass the mic. Yeah.
I'll just go. I'll put all my answers right here. Okay, we're going to get out of here. We got 15 minutes. No, we got 10 minutes. Okay. Find out about the Sherry Honkala Community Center. You can get food, clothing, housing, political education, learn how to run for office.
What Mamdani had, what Mamdani had was on the ground organizations. This is New York City. It was unique to New York City. It's very hard to duplicate that. But what, you know, in my view, we have a great message. What we need are resources to get out and run games. Go to the fundraiser, make those resources happen, and we are unstoppable. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Brianna and the panel, thank you so much.
If-